Hey, everybody. I'm Scott Britton. I'm president of the Plus Club of Long Island for all of one more week when Brendan, our host, will be taking over as president. It's been a fantastic 3 years, and I'm very happy that Brendan will be hosting this amazing program with these amazing panelists. I think this is probably one of the most important topics that we could be talking about right now in this moment in history, certainly as journalists. So without further ado, I'm going to put it over to Brendan, my friend and colleague, Brendan O'Reilly, to take it from here.
This evening, we are discussing how the media could better serve Spanish-speaking communities. We want to identify where the shortcomings are and the solutions. There was a point made at a New York Press Association conference a couple of years ago that has stuck with me, and it speaks to why we wanted to have this discussion tonight. That point was newspapers tend to write about immigrants living in their coverage areas as stories about them, when really every story about the people in your coverage area should be a story about us. These families living in our coverage areas are part of that outlet's constituency, and the otherization needs to be removed from how journalists do their work. Here on Long Island, we have a growing Spanish-speaking population and a growing number of bilingual households. I know that we have several members of the audience today from around the country who report in regions that are similar to Long Island in that way. We will open it up for audience questions and comments later on, but for now, we're going to get right into it with our panel. Daysi Calavia-Robertson is a multimedia journalist who covers cost of living and affordability issues, as well as the business of marijuana and CBD, travel, tourism, and human interest topics for Newsday. Daysi has also covered lifestyle and entertainment news for local television and is the founder of Press Pass Latino, a bilingual lifestyle website for millennial Latinos. So I'm going to pose tonight's leadoff question to Daysi, which is, what does the media often fail to understand about the diversity that exists among Latinos, and how does that shortcoming negatively affect the media's reporting?
That's a great question, Brendan. I think it's just very simple. I think that, we're not a monolith. We're not all the same. We do have a very rich culture, but we come from many different countries. Even a word that in one country might have one meaning, in another word, in one country it might mean a fruit, and in another country it might mean female genitalia. It's just it's those little nuances, those type of things that I think people just don't really take the time to learn how complex and how different Latinos are. We don't all eat the same foods. We don't all listen to the same music. We don't all even have the same religions. I think that there are a lot of misconceptions, and that we do get lumped into that same category of Latinos when we are so different in so many ways. So I think that that is one of the big misconceptions in how we're covered. If you think about the recent controversy surrounding the movie In the Heights, that has been one of the main criticisms of the film, that it is representing, Latinidad as this monolith, that it really is more of far away from the reality of what we really are. So that's what I would say, I think, is one of the main problems and what is really troubling about current coverage.
Pablo Calvi is the author of Latin American Adventures in Literary Journalism and an associate professor at Stony Brook University School of Journalism. He is also the associate director for Latin America at the Marie Colvin Center for International Reporting. Pablo, just last night, the New England chapter for the Society of Professional Journalists hosted a very valuable discussion on newsroom diversity. And what I want to ask you is, in what ways will having more diversity in newsrooms, including bilingual reporters, improve the media's ability to serve readers and viewers?
Thanks for the question, Brendan. And I want to follow up with Daysi's answer, because I thought it was a very valuable point that she made about the differences between the different sections of the Latino population here, and in two ways. And then I'm going to go into the question that you just asked. Like most Latinos who have the experience of immigration, and most Latinos who are like first or second generation in this country, have kind of a dual conscience to a degree, right? Like on the one hand, you feel that you are, I don't know, Argentine or Honduran or Guatemalan, but also at the same time, you feel, because of the way that you're addressed to in the States, that you are a Latino. We don't feel that, or we don't identify as Latinos when we're in our own countries. We are Argentines or Ecuadorians, etc. The identifier Latino, I think, is kind of an umbrella that applies to most of us, all of us, when we arrive in the United States, and we need to learn how to deal with it, and we need to learn how to respond to it, and many times it's a conflicting identity between who you actually are and what you're perceived as. So that's one aspect. The second thing, and it goes a little bit back, is like, imagine, like, I mean, it happened in history, but imagine that today Europe was conquered by the Chinese, right? And everybody was mandated to learn Chinese, and everybody spoke Chinese, right? And at some point, the European nations like kicked out the Chinese, and all of a sudden they were all speaking Chinese, but they still had their German identity underneath, and their English identity underneath, and their French identity underneath, and their cultures and their cooking and their stuff, etc. Plus all the exponential changes that would happen with travel and immigration, etc. Well, Latin America was not just a unity of people who spoke Spanish until the Spaniards arrived and conquered, right? And took over the lands of the native peoples. And if you look at the identities of pre-Columbian cultures and nations, many of them alive and fortunately not destroyed by the Spaniards during the conquest, you can realize that there's an enormous difference between those seminal original cultures that underlie what Latin America is today. So we are deceivingly a unit, because like you can say that just by speaking Spanish from the Rio Grande to Ushuaia, you can actually get by and communicate. But the cultural differences are major. I remember once I was flying back to Argentina. I was studying at, I was doing my PhD at Columbia, and one of my friends invited me for dinner, and she said, hey, what do you want to go have dinner? Where do you want to go eat? And I'd love to have some tacos. And she looked at me like, but you're going to Argentina, you're going to have plenty of tacos there. Like, I don't remember, there was one Mexican restaurant in Buenos Aires at the time. We don't know tacos. We never had tacos. I think that in the 2000s, we started learning about Mexican food, which has a rich, like tremendous tradition. And you compare Mexican food with Peruvian food, with Ecuadorian food, with Guatemalan food. It's radically different. The ingredients are different. The processes are different. Chilean food, etc. So there's a vast array of differences that culturally separate us. Now, in terms of what would you benefit from by having a Latino in your newsroom? Well, a priori, you have somebody who can connect in one or many different ways to all those different cultures that you have here in the States, where I think about 20% Latino in this country, and the projection is higher. I think it's going to be about 30% by 2050. Is the second fastest growing minority in the country after Asians, which is also the same thing. I mean, a Chinese person is not a Korean person. They don't have the same political views or the same food or the same approach to life, not even the same religion. But again, like the census does this generalization about who you're Latino or Hispanic or you're Asian, et cetera, et cetera. But so Latinos are a fast-growing minority. And imagine if you had a newsroom that does not understand anything about Black culture, right? Like imagine a newsroom that doesn't cover because it doesn't see or doesn't watch Black films or doesn't listen to rap or doesn't listen to hip hop or it doesn't understand discrimination. Or imagine if you only had Anderson Coopers in your newsroom, the sons of Gloria Vanderbilt, who come from a very particular place in a very particular area in New York City. Well, you would have a very skewed look at what the reality of the United States is, which is a varied and diverse place, right? So you would be basically baking in a point of view in your news that would separate itself and eliminate the richness and the diversity of the place you're covering, right? So I think that is basically why when you are asking for diversity in the newsroom, you are asking for equal representation, right? If you're covering a community that has 10% Latino, and those Latinos are, I don't know, 80% Ecuadorians, you probably want to have an Ecuadorian reporter in your newsroom, right? If you're covering a community that is 15% Chinese or 15% Asian and 10% Chinese, well, you probably want to have somebody there who speaks Chinese and understands the culture, because otherwise you are invisibilizing a large chunk of the community that you are covering, right? And beyond that, like if you don't want to talk about the ethics or the I think it's a kind of responsibility as a public service that we have as journalists to reflect and show our communities to the best of our abilities. But even if you go beyond that in terms of a business, it would be a little bit silly to actually alienate 10% of your readership, right? Like, and it would be a waste to not think about how to cater to 10% of a community that could potentially become a good source of income, right? So, and finally, I mean, a question of prestige, right? If I read your paper and I see that you don't know what's happening, I don't know, in Peru, with Pedro Castillo and the elections. Well, it's not that you don't know, it's that I know that you don't know, or I know that you don't care. So if you don't care, then why would I care for you, right? So it's a question of back and forth, right? Like you have to give to the community for the community to embrace you and give back to you. So I don't know if I answered in part or totally your question, but
you definitely answered the question. You gave us a lot to talk about, and I think it actually speaks to the next question that I've lined up for Marie de Mar Piedrabuena. She's the co-founder of Tu Prensa Local. It is a Spanish language local news site on the East End of Long Island. And Maria Del Mar has worked for Riverhead Local and News 12. And I do want to take a moment to say Maria Del Mar did a lot of the heavy lifting on tonight's event. She brought in Daysi, she brought in Pablo, and we really owe her a lot for putting this together tonight. And the question that I want to start off with is, being that you're there running a Spanish language news site on the East End of Long Island, also working in tandem with an English language news site on the East End of Long Island, do you find that if an English language news outlet just takes its articles or its broadcasts and it offers a Spanish language translation, is that doing enough to serve and to attract a Spanish speaking audience?
Thank you for the question, Brendan, and thank you for tonight's event. I think it's very important to have this kind of discussion. And in short, no, absolutely not. But let me touch a little bit on what Pablo and Daysi also spoke about, because I think this is all interconnected, right? So first on the issue of the term Latino, and the importance of realizing that we have, it's not a monolith, like Daysi said, it's communities, several communities of, very different groups, where, all kinds of backgrounds, cultural differences, traditions, are really different one from one another. So that is very much something that as a reporter you have to know, because it will definitely have to be included in your story. If you live in an area, like Pablo said, where a majority of Ecuadorian people are living, or a majority of Guatemalan people are living, and you are asking them a question, for example, and I'll put a quick example. In Riverhead, we have a large population of Guatemalans living here. There's been a lot of stories about the green law light, where immigrants were able to obtain driver's licenses in New York State, but if you don't know that many Guatemalans have not been able to obtain those licenses because the Guatemalan government has not been issuing passports for a long time. So those Guatemalan immigrants right now are affected because they are not able to obtain those driver's licenses, and therefore they're not going to be able to obtain a lot of, opt in to a lot of the programs that are of help during the pandemic because they don't have an identification. It's important that you realize that you are harming yourself and your outlet when you don't know who lives in your area and how to cover that area. So I don't know if I made myself clear in there. But also to the issue of diversity in newsrooms, this is something that is very important. And I know, for example, Rebecca Aguilar is a very big spokesperson on this, because it's very important. And you need to have reporters, you need to have editors, and you need to have people at the decision making spaces at the table that will be able to really assure that there is representation in that area, that is representation in that outlet, which is what you want in the end. And in regards to your question, translating a story doesn't mean that you're covering the Latino community, because if you really knew the Latino communities, if you really were covering the entire community, maybe your questions would change, maybe your angle would change, maybe you're missing something in there that is vital just because you don't know, or you need to know that community. So translating a story is not enough, definitely.
I would like to add to that also, it's because the content is not geared for them. Like, you're just translating something that was really written for a different audience. So
right.
With that in mind, no, it's definitely not enough.
So Daysi, being that you have so much experience doing lifestyle reporting and actually running a Spanish language news site for lifestyle reporting, and I also think sports plays into this too. As you said, there's different audiences and they have different interests. We're a local newspaper, and I go out in the community and I see posted at restaurants something that says that there's a concert going on. And that poster is entirely in the Spanish language. And there might be, sometimes there's actually rodeo going on. It's entirely in the Spanish language. We don't get that press release, and we don't get that even a calendar listing. How do we go about bridging that gap between what should be a community organization that's covering the entire community to picking up on this segment that for some reason we have a disconnect with?
Well, that is really where, and I obviously don't know what your budget is, but that's really where either, taking the time to hire services or hire someone who could maybe translate for you what it says on that release, or maybe working with someone at that organization, like partnering with them, maybe someone who is bilingual, or even taking some classes or downloading some apps on your phone that maybe could either translate the document for you, or where you could practice, basic Spanish things. It is a lot of work. I don't want to presume that any of this is easy. It's work, it's time consuming. It takes learning on your part, dedication, but also the forging of relationships, because I think that there can always be like a point person, someone that if they see your effort and they see your willingness, that you care, and that, I really want to cover this community. I really want to write about your group or your cause, or just maybe a person who I think is really interesting, but I'm unable to because of this barrier. Is there any way you can help me? They are gonna help you. They're gonna say, yeah, man, come on, I'll help you. What do you want to ask? And they'll be that middleman for you. And if you might have to come back more than once. You might have to come maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks, hang out, spend some time, and then after a while, they'll open up to you. They might make some jokes, and even though maybe you won't get every word, but you'll get the feel for the person. How do they act? What type of a person are they? Are they always joking? Like, are they friendly? Are they, you get that type of context that will make your story and your reporting that much more rich, even if maybe you can't get every single word that the person is saying in their language, but you can still make your article that much more rich because you are spending the time with this person, and you do have, this other person who's helping you, who you're partnering with. But it's all about, like I said, there's no substitute for doing the work. There's no substitute for taking the time and for showing that you're willing to go the extra mile and you're willing to do the effort to become a part of the community and someone that they will go to you next time, right? Because you do this type of thing a couple times, next time that something is happening, that something is breaking, or that there's some type of scoop, they'll go to you and they'll say, hey, Brendan, this is going on. Come here, let me tell you what's happening. So that's what you want. You want to be a familiar face. It'll be okay. They'll forgive you for not speaking Spanish. They'll forgive you for not being Latino, but they won't forgive you for not taking the time to care, for not taking the time to spend time in the community. That's what you won't be forgiven for.
To Daisy's point, and this, which is excellent, there's and I think I raised this before, there's another inequality, access to information, and that includes whatever language because Latinos or the Latino community is not represented enough in stories. And sometimes we have to understand as well that, a Latino group or I think you were referring to a rodeo or something like that, it's not going to put out a press release. It's not going to go ahead and just, it doesn't work the traditional way. And this is where, you have to have boots on the ground. You have to have a reporter that is on the community and that really is part of their job to cover the entire community. And, and I also wanted to point out that, Latinos are not other, they're part of the community. They're, they're as important as the gardening event down at the library. This rodeo is also part of the community. So although, you may not have gotten a press release, it's your duty to send someone to find out what the rodeo is about before, it goes on or something like that. I think that it's to me, it's a very important point because, for example, like you said, I'm on the east end of Long Island, where there's a very rich media landscape. There's a lot of media outlets that are amazing. They win awards all the time, and and I love them very much. But one of the reasons that I started to start my own publication in Spanish is because I didn't see a lot of the stories that that a large part of the community. I think we're in Suffolk County, we're 20% Latinos, and I thought that there was this very big gap, this very big gap of information missing, and that needed to be filled. So I think it's in everyone's interest to learn about what's happening, in all areas and with all people in the community.
And Pablo, do you have any other additional thoughts or suggestions on how news organizations can make inroads into those communities that they've neglected in the past?
I have an example, if you indulge me. Yeah, I had so between the early aughts and I think 2012, I worked with the Daily News in a project that was really like Mort Zuckerman like killed it in 2012, but it was called Viva New York. And it was started by this amazing Cuban journalist and writer who recently died, Albert Ruiz, and very famous in New York. And Maite Junco, who was his editor, managing, and the project was interesting because it came out as a pullout. Viva, it was so we wrote in English. Sometimes they asked us to translate our own work, which is difficult, but like they paid us to write both in English and Spanish. And there was a pullout only in Spanish. The pullouts came in different sections of New York. The Spanish pullouts came out in different sections of New York with predominantly Spanish-speaking population. But what was interesting, I think, about the team is that we had people from the Caribbean. We have people from South America. We have people from Mexico. We have people from Central America. We had Brazilians, people who spoke Portuguese, and each it's not that it was divided by nationalities, but it was clearly addressed to an audience that the newspaper understood as varied and rich, right? And it was, I think, relatively, it was very successful. We had a ton of advertising, and the outreach, as Daysi was talking, and Maria del Mar were just talking just now, we went to places. We walked our neighborhoods. We covered our events. We all spoke, of course, English and Spanish. And I think that you're a reporter, so you know how it is. Like when people see you once and twice and three times on the same corner, or buying your lunch at the same place, if you're covering a community, that community begins to trust you and begins to like embrace you, even if you are not. I remember at some point, like before that, I covered Brownsville for some time in East New York, and I'm not Black, but by sheer showing up and being respectful and walking the neighborhood, I gained the trust of the Haitian community in Brownsville, so I could do my reporting there. And I went with the idea of not extract. This is clear to me. Like and you as a community member and as a person, you can smell it a mile away. You know when somebody's there to extract a story from you, and you know when somebody is there to give back and to care for the community, right? Like, so you see when people are parachuting into a community to just like sensationalize whatever happened, and you know when people show up consistently with patience and with care, and they want the best for the community. Because like if you are there and you're showing up and you're their skin in the game, you're putting your skin in the game, then it is clear that there's something beyond that immediate story that you're gonna get out of it, right? And it's not that you shouldn't get a story, but the angles and the way you look at a community changes the more you are connected to that community, right?
Thank you. Another topic I wanted to cover was this thing that we tend to run into a lot, where when publications go out to write about Spanish-speaking communities, overwhelmingly the topic has to do with immigration and immigration status. And then you're not really telling the full story of that community. You're not telling all the other parts of their lives, like the concerts or the rodeos that we were mentioning earlier. People don't, they have other things going in their lives than their immigration status. And if they pick up a newspaper, turn on a radio, or go on a website, they're going to want to see other things about themselves. They just don't want to be this topic of interest based on their national origin or their parents' national origin. Maria Del Mar and Daysi, whoever wants to take this, how does a newspaper go about jumping in to tell stories and go up to somebody and say, hey, we're from the newspaper and we'd like to talk to you about something that is not about, migrant workers in Southampton, which is, often a reason historically why we found ourselves writing about our local Spanish-speaking population. Like, how do you go and say that you just want to talk about their soccer league or some other aspect of their life, where we could break down the language barrier and not have it be always hammering on immigration or immigration status?
First of all, we have to acknowledge the implicit biases that we all have, and that sometimes as reporters also show up. And that, I think it's a first step. Also, I think that it's not about approaching someone and say, can I report on something different besides immigration? I think it's going in while you're walking the community, while you're talking to people and creating those relationships, and maybe you hear from one of those interviews that their son is actually graduating from high school and they love soccer, and maybe they are part of a soccer league or something like that. So maybe just show up to that like a soccer event and see if they're doing something special, and starting to create those relationships with people in the community really will open up a bunch of stories relating to the different groups that live here in the area. What in the end, what it is all about is to see yourself reflected in any type of story. It doesn't matter where you look at. And I think there's this big tendency of putting Latinos especially into these immigration stories, or there's almost sometimes negative stories, tragic stories, right? And we really want to highlight the success stories as well, and we want to highlight the differences that exist within many communities, and not only in terms of one topic. We want to go beyond immigration and talk about, for example, if that those immigration stories sometimes don't start with that first immigrant that comes here. Sometimes in those immigration stories, go down the line, because you may be a fifth generation native born Latino, right? And that is also still with you, because maybe your grandfather is immigrated from Guatemala, but you're still here in the area, and you wanna, and that's interrelated. So that's a story right there, right? So that happens with farm workers, for example, that you were talking about. There's farm working families that have several generations living, for example, on North Fork. So I think that it's very important to acknowledge that we have to do the work, like Daysi said, to go out in the community and really create those relationships and try to find out different stories, not only immigration stories, but try to find out what other success stories they may be, or highlight, different aspects, different angles, because every story you can find, every topic you can find, you're going to be able to find, different types of communities that intersect. And that's what happened in the end, is that's intersection where our story is going to be more rich, more diverse, more, more representative of where we live.
I think that to add to that, I would like to say that, yes, I agree with Maria del Mar. We do have to do the work of finding those stories, but to me, it's less about, like your original question was like, how would you approach someone that you were going to interview? I don't really think that it's about approaching someone. Like, I don't think I would ever approach someone in that way. Like, let me talk to you about something other than immigration. I think I was a little confused by that. I think it's more like also doing the work in the newsroom with our editors, because a lot of times they're the ones who are confused and think that, oh, we cover Latinos because we cover immigration. So I think that, yeah, we can do the work, we can definitely do it in the field and find these wonderful, success stories of these people in our community who are doing these wonderful things and just happen to be Latinos. But then it's going back to our editors and pitching it and saying like, this is also covering Latinos. It's not just we cover immigration and that's good enough coverage of Latinos. This is what it should look like also. So I think, doing the work also is having those difficult, uncomfortable conversations with our editors about what we think and that coverage should look like of Latinos and what we deserve. We don't deserve only to have coverage of our communities be immigration and, negative stories and deportations and, all these things. So it's doing the work in the field and in the newsroom.
Thank you.
I wonder who here knows that some of the most important stakeholders, I think it's on Etsy, One, and then Netflix, are Latinos. I mean, there's Latino here. I'm currently in California, in the Bay Area, right? But what I'm saying is that or who knows that Louis C.K. is half Mexican, right? Like, so the thing is that you wouldn't know because you wouldn't care unless you were part of the community, right? And that's an advantage that you have when you have a reporter that lives that life, that understands and speaks Spanish, that is aware of those little things. But there's also, the flip side of the coin is that, like, because you have a Guatemalan reporter, you're not gonna like pigeonhole that reporter into just covering Guatemalan issues, right? Like, so I think that what is interesting is that extra point of view that is baked into that person's ideas and approach will expand the vision that you have when you're covering news. But you have to be paying attention to, and you have to have editors who are interested and curious, right? Because not just for the sake of having somebody who is exposed or part of a community, you're just going to have fiat Latino coverage, right? As my colleagues are saying.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I just wanted to say something about that, because I think I wanted to put an example. You have to pay attention to what's going on. I mean, and I think it also starts, like Daysi said, in the newsroom, in the sense that, for example, from reading just the stories on, whatever national outlet or international outlet, you realize, for example, I read that in Colombia, there was like a lot of conflict and social protests and a lot of unrest. So one of the things that we asked ourselves at Tu Prensa Local was, okay, we have a large population of Colombians in Hampton Bays, in Southampton. So what are they doing? Are they affected? They're here, their families are over there. So what's going on, right? So we went out in the community and we found out that there were actually protests in East Hampton, Southampton. There was a woman that walked from Southampton all the way to the Colombian consulate, walking, like basically walking. She took 6 days to reach Manhattan, to protest. So all of these stories, they just don't call us to tell us, oh, we have, I'm walking the 100 miles to get to Manhattan. We went out into the community and we asked, to Colombian groups, what is going on? How are you? So all of those things are important, and you can only have that if you have someone in the newsroom that says, okay, what is going on? So, and after we did that story, CNN was calling us, and Univision was calling us, and but we broke the story at a little newspaper in Long Island, and now it's a national story, right? So that's why it's important.
That's great, thank you. We're going to throw it to audience questions. We're going to start with David North, who is one of our Press Club of Long Island board members. He had typed a question into the chat, but I believe that he is on mic and on camera. And anybody else who would like to ask a question, please start turning your cameras on, and we'll jump to Rebecca after David. David?
And thank you. And I'd like to thank the panel. This is a fascinating discussion. And just from my experience as a reporter, I just see the American story being told again and again, that people will come from another homeland, they'll come to the US and become a community. And we as reporters have to know that we're all part of our community, as Brendan said when he introduced this. So my question originally was, how much time should Long Island publications and broadcasters devote to news from the old country, just to show that that respect and relationship is there? But as I heard, Maria, your answer just now, it got me thinking that, or remembering that something that broadcasters were once required to do is something that should be resurrected. It's called an ascertainment process, where you actually ask people in the community what your issues are. You might find that they may have to deal with cultural issues, but more often than not, you find out they have to do with our community's issues. These are our roads. This is our public safety. These are our school boards. These are our neighbors communicating together to make richer communities. So that may be something helpful, but just, I guess, that initial thing, how much should a traditional Long Island publication or broadcaster spend time devoting to helping the wider community understand what's going on in Colombia, for example?
I wanted to jump. Can I jump on the answer, Dave? Because
Please.
it was what Maria was just saying was a perfect example of how you can do that. Without going to Colombia directly, you can actually reference the protest here and explain what's going on there and why they're protesting here. So there's an immediate connection if you are just looking at what happens in the community, because the community many times reacts to what's happening in the old country. It's if you haven't been following what's happening in Bolivia, per se, you could connect to a Bolivian community and ask what's going on with them, and see or what's happening, I don't know, in Peru right now, which is tremendous. It's gonna be they're trying to rob the election, right? So the Peruvian communities are especially the indigenous communities are up in arms. So all those things you can see an echo here, and then reflect on what's happening back in the country. I don't think you need to become you don't need to deploy an army of foreign correspondents to do justice to the stories that are happening in back in the country.
But do you have advice for the locally employed reporters to help them communicate to the wider reading or listening or viewership about why those incidents and events in other countries matter to them? They'll say, well, that's their neighborhood, that's their concern, this doesn't affect me. What's your advice for helping the wider community understand what's going on with their neighbors and why they should care?
Should I take it, or Maria?
So I am, I'm a local publisher, right? So I publish local news, and when I write a story, or when we write a story, we do it from the point of view of the local community. And let's say Colombian immigrants, or in the end, it's important to everyone, right? Because we're trying to just highlight something that happens at the local level. As far as the point into educating the local community, the wider local community of why they should care about this issue, right, is because their neighbors are being impacted, because there's something happening here at the local level where, you know, if there are protests and you have someone, you know, walking 100 miles to bring and raise attention, raise awareness on an issue, it's because there's something major going on, and, you know, those people may have, I don't know, suddenly be losing loved ones. Maybe they may be affected at many levels. So I think I mean, we would never ask ourselves, for example, if you report on a story about someone here who is raising funds for the wildfires in California, right? So we wouldn't ask that person, you know, is this something that the community should care about? No, we would just report it and say, you know, this group is raising funds, and, you know, even though the funds are going to be sent to California, they're doing it here at the local level, and this is happening, and it's important for people to know they want to contribute. Great, something like that, right? So we have to report on it, just because it's part of where we live, and we want to let people know on what the local community are doing.
This may be a silly example, but like if you're on Valentine's Day, if you're buying flowers in New York, the odds are those flowers are coming from Ecuador. Most of the roses that you have in New York, that you buy in New York, they're coming from Ecuador. And if you go to Ecuador, or if you know about Ecuador or the flower industry in Ecuador, you know that there's a big issue in the vicinities of Quito and in the north that have to do with the encroaching of these flower farming industries onto indigenous communities, right? So, I mean, I'm not saying that everybody has to know that, but what I'm saying is that there's always a way to connect something that happens here with something that happens there. I think that's a question of like, again, having the right person or the right like reporters in your team, having a little bit of awareness and curiosity, and, you know, trial and error too, because nobody's gonna get the stories right the first time, but the fact that you don't get it right the first time doesn't mean that you should stop trying.
And I also wanted to highlight something that sometimes, you know, we don't have to make an issue of someone, you know, when we write a story of someone being Latino. I mean, because this is something also that sometimes it bothers me personally when I read it, where, you know, we're writing a story about, I don't know, someone who graduated from university and they're doing something great, right? And we have to point out, oh, and by the way, he is a Latino who lives here in the country for so many years, and almost we put their status, and, you know, we write all of the stories about, you know, that person graduating and doing something great, not about, you know, we don't have to set that person apart because he is Latino. We never would do that with a white person, right? So I think that we have to really try to get the point across that, you know, Latinos, they're part of the community. They're one more of, you know, of us, and we have to report on their stories the same way we will report on any other people's stories.
Thank you for that question, David. And our next question comes from the president-elect of the Society of Professional Journalists, Rebecca Aguilar. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca.
Definitely, coming to you from Dallas, by the way. Brendan, first of all, to you and the chapter, excellent. Thank you for putting together this panel, because I think every chapter should be doing this, especially if they have a Spanish-speaking community. And of course, I know Maria and Daysi, outstanding journalists. One of the questions that I wanted to put to them, and I'm because I want everybody who doesn't have maybe a Latino friend reporter out there. Here in Dallas, when I am on assignment and I see people who don't speak Spanish, and there's Latinos who don't speak Spanish either, sometimes I will help translate, because even though we're competition, I do want to help them out because I want the information out. You know, Maria and Daysi and Pablo también also. share how you are, because I know all of you, especially, you know, that you're very giving with your time. And I mean, obviously, Maria, you have your own publication that says you're very giving to the community. Tell me how you work with English language reporters to help them out in the field when they're struggling, because I think it's important to have that collaboration too. And I know you, especially you ladies, that you're very giving with your talent and your efforts and your work. Tell me about that.
Well, I can say that, so here at Newsday, I'm a business reporter, but because of my skills and being able to speak Spanish, I have assisted in so many different projects from, you know, there was a fire and the family was from El Salvador and the reporter couldn't communicate with them. So I was able to help her with that, translating everything they were saying. Another family who unfortunately they were victims of a gang violence, so I was able to help with that. Pretty much any time that with across the newsroom that there's been a situation where the reporter needed me to help translating, I have been able to do that, and that's something that it's a point of pride for me. I am always ready to help. I'm more than happy to. And yeah, I know that I've heard, you know, online and in other groups that some reporters are not so happy to do it. And they think, you know, there's the question of like, well, we should be getting paid more money. I'm not a translator, I'm a journalist. This isn't what I do. But for me, it doesn't bother me at all. I'm more than happy. I feel that it makes me more of an asset. It makes me more marketable as a reporter, as a journalist. And it really just doesn't bother me at all personally. I respect the point of view of other journalists if they feel that, you know, that maybe we should get paid more for it. I mean, but personally, it's a joy for me to be able to do it. And I think that, you know, it opens up more opportunities because I was able to work on those stories that maybe I wouldn't have been able to work on those stories because I am a business reporter. And now I have the experience to say that I did those other things that are breaking news. So breaking news or hard news that I was able to do and step outside what I normally do because I was able to come in and communicate. So at least that's my take on it, and I'm happy to do it.
Thank you. I agree with you. Maria?
Well, I agree with Daysi. I think that it's important to collaborate. I think in collaboration, great things come. And I can put a great example of this. So I worked at Riverhead Local, and I developed a great relationship with the publisher, one of the publishers, Denise Civiletti. And today we collaborate a lot on, you know, there's a story that, you know, maybe she's covering, and, you know, she can just call me and ask me, what do you think on, you know, would this angle be, you know, better, or is this appropriate? And you know, I just give her my opinion, and or, you know, I will find maybe you know, sources for that story, so that story becomes stronger and, you know, and better, or the opposite. You know, if we cover a story, we do a story that I think, you know, is relates to the Riverhead community, and I will share it with Denise, and Denise will do the same with us. So I think you really have to, but I have to say though, you know, you have to find partners also that are willing to be open and really share their time as well, and it becomes a true collaboration. You know, you're not, you know, translating for free, or you're not providing your insight or your knowledge for free, or just because it's because there's a true collaboration, a true understanding on both parts. So really want to do something better for the community, something more you know, yes, better serve your community. And the same thing with my partner Juliana Holguin. She's in the East Hampton area, and, you know, she also collaborates a lot with you know, people on the East End, telling them what's going on with the Latino community, and maybe they might not know because of a language barrier, but they can always call on us, and we will be happy to let them know, so we can be stronger together. I know it's like cliche, but it is the truth.
And it's my hope,
Thank
that, if there's, other reporters who maybe speak Creole or Korean or another language, where in an area where maybe there is a Haitian community or there is a Korean community, that they would do the same thing, that there could be, like Maria del Mar was saying, a partnership with them where they would lean in, and there could be the same type of partnership, because I think that that's really crucial, and I think it's really important. And in my situation, it was like you were saying, where it was shared bylines or tags, and it was definitely something where we were able to work together.
So I don't know if Pablo wanted to weigh in on that, or if we should go to the next question.
I think it's Daysi and Maria del Mar just I share their opinion. I think that the only problem I have is when that helping and then that translation becomes it starts eating out your own reporting time and your own writing time, and you don't have any support other than yourself. But if it's a real collaboration, and we are all helping each other, even like competing. I remember many times when you're abroad and you do speak the language and somebody doesn't, and they don't have a fixer, which is a terrible name for somebody who can actually sometimes be a reporter. But it happened to me many times in Bolivia or like in Ecuador. I have reporters who don't speak the language, and I'm helping them translate. I think that's fair because you want the issue to be out. But again, you don't like to feel later in the game that you're being taken advantage of, right? That's that leaves you a really bitter feeling, and you feel used, and that's not fair either.
Thank you, Pablo. So we're going to go to the president, soon to be former president of PCLI, Scott Brinton. And Scott, when you ask your question, I think it would also be great if you could also after that introduce Damali Ramirez, who is a guest that we have tonight, who is a Hofstra student who has done some work on excluded workers. And we're going to go to Damali after we go to Scott's question. Scott?
Yeah, well, first I want to definitely, on behalf of the Press Club, thank all of the three speakers. It's been fascinating. It's an important discussion, so I'm very happy that we're having it. It's a discussion that I know that we're committed to at the Press Club, continuing over in the coming years. That being said, I found the very beginning of the conversation tonight really, really important about the cultural differences between the different parts of the Latino community, that it's not a monolithic community. And I think in America, we generally tend to think of it as one monolithic community. So my question is, for those who are not Latino in the newsroom, how do you go about educating yourself on the Latino community in America, and specifically, since you're all here on Long Island?
As a reporter, it starts by talking to people in your community, in learning, which countries are more predominant in your area. If you are covering a specific part of Long Island, I'm just gonna say, Riverhead, for example, you will soon learn after starting talking to people that the prevalence of immigrants from Guatemala and Mexico is much higher than maybe Dominican Republic, for example. So maybe you can start there, and once you know that, you can start finding out a little bit more about the culture and of that specific country, or the specific countries that you're covering. But I think that's a start, and I think it's a positive start, because it really starts a conversation where you will have questions, and you will hopefully reach out more and more, and little by little you will start educating yourself, and at the same time also creating relationships. And yes, it's really to have an openness of mind and a willingness to go out there, understand that Latinos are everywhere. They're from farm workers to doctors and nurses. Now that Damali is gonna talk about excluded workers, for example. There's we're everywhere, and and we really want to as reporters, be fair and understand that we don't have to put people in boxes. We really have to go out there and be, as fair as possible, but at the same time, from a point of view of openness.
I would say to read. Reading will take you to so many places, anywhere you want to go. It's really the best ways to learn about anything. And I think that also starting with the geography, because I think that a lot of times people don't even really know where these countries are. I mean, they just don't. So looking at a map and kind of knowing, well, okay, Mexico's here, Guatemala's here, Nicaragua's here, Colombia, Peru. So starting with figuring out where the countries are, and then just reading about them. So reading about the countries, reading about the people, taking it from there. But yeah, just that's the best way really to educate yourself. That's my best suggestion for everything. I mean, as a journalist, I can't stress it enough to read books, read newspapers, read websites, read Newsday.
One of the things that I teach I recently created this class called Global Journalism, right? And I focused mostly on Latin American current events. And even though my students are, many of them, like I think we have like a 50% in like non-white students, right? Many of them from Latin America or first generation Latin American in the United States. They are surprised about the things that they don't know about Latin America or the differences. So reading, and I agree, it's a fantastic way to get to understanding a culture or parts of a culture. But I think that it also has to have you have to be interested in something, right? Like you need to have a keyhole, like something that you're looking into, very specific. If you're interested in surfing, for instance, and you do some research, and you will find out that Peru is a peak surfing community, then you can start with what interests you and what you have in common with that culture. I think that finding commonalities is like the cognitive, like a 101, cognitive theory 101. You need to know something in common, or you need to have a baseline or threshold or a baseline of agreeable or agreement and communal knowledge in order to build onto that knowledge, right? So you need to be able to relate. If you like soccer, for instance, in Brazil or Argentina, that's a point of entry, right? And then you read about soccer, and then you understand the several idiosyncratic aspects of Mexico or Argentina, like by the sheer love of that sport. But there has to be something that you are interested in, because doing it at a forced pace will be very dissatisfying. You have to love something in order to actually learn it, I think, or at least trigger that love in one way or another, right?
I agree with Pablo and Daysi, but at the same time, I think also, again, I'm talking from the local aspect, from a local point of view, right? And for example, I am from Spain. I was born in Spain. My mother is from Colombia. My father is from Chile. I'm very diverse, and I live here in America. So there you go. But I didn't know nothing, for example, of Guatemalan culture or Mexican culture. I just knew in the surface, things in the surface, right? And even though maybe geographically I knew where these countries were, I really didn't know enough. Even though I speak the language, I speak Spanish. So I have to point out, there's a lot of people also who come here who don't speak Spanish. Spanish is not their first language. It's maybe Mixteco, maybe other languages. But anyway, so I'm digressing. But the point is, I remember once driving by a church in West Hampton and seeing this huge event, seeing a lot of people in cars and people dressed up in costumes, and I was like, whoa, what is that, right? So I stopped and I went in, and it turns out it was this Guatemalan festival, and I didn't know, but people from Guatemala hold an annual festival where thousands of people from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and all over the place come here to West Hampton to have a party for the Virgin Mary, and they dress up and everything else. And if I had not stopped by that day and hadn't started talking to people, I would never known this. And now, since that day I stopped by at that church, I go every year to this event and cover the event and talk to people, and they know me already. So like I said, I personally didn't know about that this was so important, but I learned that day just because I stopped by at that church. And I also learned, for example, that here in this area, there's a large population from a specific town from Guatemala. It's not even the whole of Guatemala, it's a specific town. So, all of these things, like I said, I could have been from anywhere in the world and, just learn it by going there that day. So
Be open.
exactly.
So I just want to introduce Damali Ramirez, who's a student of mine at Hofstra. I'm a professor at Hofstra as well as executive editor of Herald Newspapers. Damali has been a student of mine for the past year, and she's also the student editor, undergraduate editor of the Long Island Advocate, which is Hofstra's online publication. And she has done some remarkable reporting this past year on excluded workers. So Damali, maybe you'd like to say a few words on exactly defining for those who don't know what an excluded worker is and why this interests you so much, and maybe talk a little bit about your reporting over the past year. And by the way, she is the Press Club of Long Island's scholarship winner this year, which is fantastic. And she also won a bunch of awards in our press club competition. So congratulations, Damali.
Thank you, Professor Britton. Well, Professor Britton gave away my answer. I was going to say that I've been fortunate enough to have a professor like him who heard my issues on, I realized that there was a media gap with coverage within Hempstead and Unionville, which are two predominantly Hispanic and Black communities. And he allowed me, to write for the Long Island Advocate and, spread my issues. And that's how I came about writing the Fund Excluded Workers campaign, which Fund Excluded Workers are undocumented workers that did not qualify for federal stimulus checks during the pandemic. And a lot of people did not know that undocumented workers, because of their immigration status, couldn't get these unemployment checks and were heavily relying on food banks or borrowing money from the church or families from back home. And it was just a huge issue that was going on for a year. And then there was a protest down at Pactua, I believe. I forgot where it was. It was a long time ago. And that's when I first, yeah. And that's where I first met Make the Road New York, which is this amazing immigration advocate group. And I got to speak to them. And one of the first issues that I was told was, sorry, I don't speak English, when I approached one of the workers. And I was just like, okay, I was like, I speak Spanish too. Like, that's not an issue. And then that's when it really hit me that I was one of the few journalists reporting on these issues because I was bilingual, but also that a lot was being lost in translation. So yes, there were some some media coverage with the Fund Excluded Workers campaign. Actually, towards the end of it, when Como passed the bill, the $1 billion bill, the New York Times picked up on the story, and it was just kind of weird to me that they weren't there from the start when, you know, they were out at, you know, like protesting on the streets. They protested outside Senator Thomas' office in Hempstead. And funny, even with the Hempstead protest, I was literally the only reporter there. And by that time, they're like, "Oh, you're here again." I was like, "Yeah, I'm here again." But it's funny you guys are talking about, you know, these gaps in media and representation. But another thing that I've been noticing is that there's a huge gap with young, like Latinx journalists and older Latinx journalists. So for instance, like a lot of the older population knows how to write in Spanish or read Spanish, whereas like first generations like myself, even though we speak the language, we aren't proficient in writing it. So we aren't welcome to like predominantly Spanish media outlets because we don't have that skill. So even though we know the culture, we know the language, we understand the issues, you know, we get turned away because we can't write the language. You know, it's so I guess my question to you guys is, you know, what advice would you give to a young student journalist that only can write in English and wants to work for a Spanish news outlet, but isn't welcome there? And then in English outlets, you know, their issues aren't being heard because, you know, Latinx representation is lacking.
Well, Damali, there are programs. I don't know what you're thinking of doing as far as your college education, but there are programs that you can take. I know I did a Spanish language master's at Florida International University. And so, but there can be other programs, even online, maybe certificate programs where you can learn how to write in Spanish. So that's definitely an option for you that I think you should look into. I know that it might seem like a daunting thing, but I don't think that you should think of it as something that's impossible. I think that if, you know, you have the wish in your heart that you would like to explore like journalism in Spanish, I think that you should definitely go for it. And I mean, I know that, like you said, it is a skill, but you are already bilingual. So, you know, you are halfway there in a sense. So I do encourage you to at least think about it, at least explore it, at least see, you know, what is available in terms of higher education and what programs are there that you could do in Spanish. But it is a challenge. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any other advice for her of how we could tackle this issue.
Well, Damali, you're more than welcome to come and you know and work at Tu Prensa Local, and you know and we can talk. And because for example, for us, we're an online publication, so we not only do written articles, but we are multimedia. We do you know, videos, and we do podcasting and a bunch of other things where, you know, you might not be able to write perfectly in Spanish, but you know, you are a journalist and you can tell the story. So you know, that's what editors are for as well there. You know, we're not going to be alone just jumping into everything. You know, we'll be able to guide you and help you along the way, certainly. But I also, at the same time, I wanted to answer the other half of your question, where you were saying that, you know, as a Latino reporter, because I was once in your shoes as well. I actually worked in American, quote unquote, English media outlets my whole life until I started my own publication in Spanish. And, you know, I was once that Latino reporter. And sometimes I was a token Latina reporter. Sometimes, you know, I was a reporter that was covering only immigration issues. Other times not. I was giving, you know, more opportunities, and I'm very thankful for that, because, you know, we can, as reporters, I guess, we want to cover everything and not just be pigeonholed into the Latino issues, right? I wanna, this is not for Damali, it's for, you know, the editors here and the decision makers and everyone that, you know, that in their own newsrooms, to really try to not do this, to not pigeonhole young Latino reporters, to really understand they have a lot of things to offer, and in not just send them for immigration stories, right? But yeah, so anytime you want to talk, Damali, I'm open.
I also had another thought for you.
I'm gonna
I think you can also pursue internships. So maybe if you did some internships like at Spanish language newspapers or magazines or a Spanish language station, that could really help you to improve your skills.
In CUNY has a master's in Spanish, also journalism in Spanish.
It's a very good master's. Damari, I want to channel your grandmother, and I'm going to tell you that you should read in Spanish. Lee, mijita, en español. That's
Lo
important.
leo.
Okay. So reading and then working with a good editor in Spanish, like that's key. The same as you learn to write good copy in English by working with a good editor, right? So I think that that's the same thing. If you find the right editor who could mentor you into writing good Spanish, you would, I don't think, and you're reading in Spanish too, you wouldn't have any problem like transitioning.
It's so funny because when I was young, my mom used to come home from school and I had to do my English language homework, and then she would give me Spanish language homework. And I would cry because I hated it. I didn't want to do it. I was like, this is not real homework. I don't want to do this. And I would cry, and she would just make me do it every day. She had her own books and she would force me. And now years later, like I am just like so happy that she put me through this torture, because I have been able to do this work. I worked at El Nuevo Herald and Telemundo, and I've been able to do these things because of her. So now she's like, oh, you see why I did this to you? So it's just sometimes funny, like how years later, like we thank our parents for the crazy things that they make us do when we're little.
Wow.
And I also wanted to say, and now that Damali is here, it is so important to for universities, schools of journalism, to attract more diversity also in schools of journalism, because I know when I went to school, I think in the whole promotion it was me and another Latina. That's it. Everybody else, was predominantly white. So I think that is also starts, during high school and when they go to make a decision to go into college and university, to really try to recruit students for the schools of journalism, so it's more diverse. We have more diverse newsrooms.
Damali, one suggestion that I just came to mind is like when I started, I teach a long form course in literary journalism, which is what I do basically at Stony Brook. And I remember one final project, a student of mine asked me if they could turn in their final paper in Spanish, and I don't have any problem with that. So maybe where you are studying, if you can approach a professor who's bilingual and you want to turn in copy or papers in Spanish, I don't think that would be a problem. And this student of mine actually is currently working in bilingual media. So I don't know, it could be an option.
And if you ever want to send any of your work like to me, like I can help you, you can call me or email me. If there's anything at all that I can do to help you, like I'm always available. Like, after the call, we can, I can give you my information, and I'm more than happy to help you any way I can.
Well, I think Damali raises an interesting issue, an important issue. I shouldn't say interesting, but an important issue, because, we at the Herald, we hire with purpose, Spanish speakers. But I hadn't really thought about the written part of it before. And we do, like Damali, many of them are second generation or third generation. And, they have lost the writing part of it in many ways. They're still Spanish speakers, but have lost the writing part of it. But Damali, I think we should probably talk to Professor Murillo about that, because it could, because for the Long Island Advocate, you could certainly write certain pieces in Spanish to the degree that you're able to, and then he could certainly work with you. I'm sure he'd be happy to work with you in terms of, you know, polishing them and perfecting them for the publication. I would love to see, you know, pieces potentially published both in English and in Spanish. That would be pretty cool. So, that's, I'm glad you brought that up because I didn't thought about that before.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the end here. I want to make sure that we get in a question that we received much earlier. Renee Bethany, you had a question?
Oh, well, I'm new to reporting really kind of at all, but in the Herald, but I have lived in Hempstead for 28 years. And there is a black and brown divide, which I was unaware until I got much more familiar with the community. And I became the village historian, and then I tried to get material from the Spanish side, which is now a little bit larger than the black side in Hempstead, and get information and get pictures. And there were several people that I met up with, like George Ciberon, who is the executive director of the Hempstead Hispanic Civic Association, and another lady, Gladys Rodriguez, whose husband, Max Rodriguez, was the first and one of the only Spanish trustees on the board of trustees in the village. And they would say, yes, I'll get you material, and then they never did. And I feel like I very much appreciate Pablo's words about a keyhole and really finding the commonalities to speak to people, because I feel like I want to write in the Hempstead Beacon about the Spanish side and about issues there, but I feel kind of locked out in a way, and also like I don't want to be intrusive. And so your words about just showing up more in the community are really, really helpful to me. And I haven't had so much time lately, but I will go to Noticias LI or El Correo and read and El Diario and just figure out what's going on. I'm just thinking, is that a good starting point? Reading in those papers for helping me grasp what issues I do have in common, and just talking to people about those particular things? Or is it more like what you said, where I just become part of the community and listen, and then I'll start to hear? Does it help to be reading the Spanish speaking papers?
Yeah, I think it does. I think that meeting with community organizers helps too, and I think that showing up is probably a good idea, because I mean, you said you were a historian, but probably what you're doing is more ethnographic than historian at this point, or almost, or in between history and ethnography, and probably like being there as a participant in some of the events, or showing up will open up a number of contacts for you to explore that part of the story of Hempstead, I think.
Yeah, and Freeport. Okay. Yeah, there's a big circular in Hempstead, Evergreen, a charter school there, and I have been there once. Okay, everything that you're saying is very helpful to me, because it helps that I was a census taker in Hempstead for a while, and I spoke enough Spanish combined with the instructions in Spanish that I was able to get a lot of people to fill out the census form that otherwise weren't. But I mean, you've really helped me see the way is just not to worry so much about the fact that I'm obviously not of the community. I mean, I had this feeling like people would feel like, what are you doing here, you know? But what you're saying to me is, if I show that interest in that way and just try and be there more, then they will be able to tell me what they would like to see written about and reported. And I really appreciate that.
We did have another question in the queue. Jake Pellegrino, what was your question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, you know, if you don't speak Spanish, I mean, how can you have more effective interviews with Spanish speaking people without kind of being disrespectful. I mean, I feel like whenever I try to interview somebody who doesn't speak English very much, I'm always trying, to squeeze answers out of them, even though they don't really speak English. What are you talking about? Can you explain that again? And this and that, I don't want to make them feel stupid, So, I mean, what would you say is the best way to conduct interviews respectfully, with that language barrier?
But one like they speak a language and a little bit of the other, whereas
Yeah, they speak
why? So
very little
probably
English.
they feel incapacitated, but they probably don't feel stupid. They may blame you for not speaking Spanish.
Mhm.
But yeah, I let the I think that Daysi or Maria del Mar wanted to say something.
No, I can tell you a story about this. So when I was in Stony Brook at the university, I interned for a while WSH2, like an NPR news station, and so there were a lot of stories that had to deal with that we had to interview Latinos who didn't speak English at that time, and I accompanied the reporter who was my mentor at the time. He didn't speak a word of Spanish, and I kind of went as an in-between, like a translator slash reporter in training to with him. And so I was like the bridge between that person and the reporter who didn't speak Spanish. And so bringing someone along with you who might be able to interpret, but maybe is another journalist, or maybe is you're collaborating. You can collaborate with a journalist who speaks Spanish in that story specifically, or even just a plain translator will help. And again, I come back to this, creating that relationship. If you first introduce yourself and then, go back several times and you create this relationship with that specific community where you're at, you'll know who to call next time that you have an interview like that. You'll know where to go. You'll know who will act as the bridge for you, So it's about creating those relationships, because, in some way or another, you're going to have those types of interview at some point, and you need to create those find those bridges or find those collaborations so you can write a good story.
As a technical advice, maybe what I mean, always tape record your interviews, and ask the interviewee when it is not clear in English, ask them to tell you the answer in Spanish, and then find somebody who can actually help you with the translation.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
There's also a very good
translate.
Yeah, I mean, if you're traveling to any, it's very useful, like Google Translate, like the one you have on the phone.
Yeah.
So that helps sometimes, but I would always err on the side of caution and like record both the English answer and the Spanish answer, and then match them with somebody who can actually help me translate.
That's such great advice, Pablo. And unfortunately, we're going to have to end in a couple minutes here, though there was one last question in the chat that I want to make sure that we don't neglect, which was, what advice does the panel have for young journalists who do feel pigeonholed into being a translator, and they feel pigeonholed into only ever getting to report on Latino issues? I guess that, it sounds like a conversation they're going to have with their editor. Does any panelist have any advice on that?
Yeah, pitch stories. Like, you can get pigeonholed, but you can also pitch your own stuff. So pitch as much as you can, find an angle or a type of a line of story that you like. Because if you're feeling pigeonholed, it's because you're not being able to channel whatever you like to do. So pitch stories about what you like to do too. And ultimately, I mean, it's not neglecting your job to actually ask your editor, well, I mean, I pitch you 5 stories of this other thing. You keep sending me to report on that. Why don't you want me to write about this? And have a conversation if that's the case.
speaking up, I think it's very important. And if your editors are not listening to you, after speaking up, it's not the right publication, I think that what Pablo said is very important. You have to pitch in the stories and really show what you're interested in. And, because sometimes editors or, they may just don't know, they, like I said, they have those implicit biases, and so really you have to educate them and say, I want to write about all of these other issues. So hopefully they will listen to you and give you that opportunity. If they don't, it's not the right publication.
I agree with my colleagues. You definitely have to advocate for yourself and pitch. And if you're not being valued, you're not being appreciated, then you have to take your talent somewhere else where they will be.
Thank you so much again to our panel, Maria del Mar Piedrabuena, Pablo Calvi, Daysi
Calavia-Robertson.
Thank you. I actually opened up all the mics because I did want to give everybody else the opportunity to say thank you to our panel. Thank you for everybody who watched live. Thank you to everybody watching the stream. Thank you to everybody who's watching this after the fact. We really appreciate you being here. We hope you found a lot of value in it. You can learn more about the Press Club of Long Island at pcli.org. If you're not a member of the Society of Professional Journalists and you want to be one, go to pj.org/join. Thank you once again, everybody. Thanks again to our audience. This was a great event, and we look forward to seeing you the next time we do this.